Well, good afternoon, and welcome to the Avatar Face to Face, our weekly kind of cable show that's part of Avatar's Media Center. We welcome you today because we have a fantastic guest, a woman who is quite experienced in a number of industries relative to the U.S. relations with the Caribbean and the Caribbean itself. So it gives me great pleasure at this time, if you will, to welcome our guest, Miss Dorothy Hall.
Thank you.
Okay, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
We wanted to kind of introduce this because we are in the process of developing a combined program for the celebration of the 50th year anniversary, if you will, for independence for Jamaica and for Trinidad, and putting together then a year-long calendar of events that salutes the whole kind of Caribbean basin. And so I wanted to kind of speak with you. You're a very intricate part of that process, and give a little background about your experience in terms of the different roles that you've played in the development of a number of things. And I wanted to begin with kind of tell us a little bit about what was happening in 1962 with the actual independence of Jamaica particularly.
Okay. In August of 1963, actually,
Okay.
yeah, all the pieces were in place, all the political machinations had happened, and Jamaica was ready to become an independent part of the world. Prior to that, Jamaica had been part of the British Commonwealth. Mm-hmm. Loyalty was owed to the Queen and the government of England. The head of the Queen's administration in Jamaica was a Governor General who was sent out from England. And at midnight on August 5th, the Welsh Fusiliers marched out of the National Stadium carrying the British flag, and the Jamaica Defence Force marched in carrying the Jamaican flag. And that was symbolic of so many things that were going to happen when a country changes its political status.
I see.
The head of the government was now a Jamaican, the Prime Minister. The government was set in motion by a Jamaican Parliament, no longer the British government. The defense of the country was in the hands of the Jamaica Defence Force, not the British soldiers who were sent out every 3 years. So, symbolically, one flag was marched out of the stadium and another was brought in. But there were so many different things that contributed to that made a country an independent country and responsible for its own destiny.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So I was there. So, I can't pretend to be younger than I am because I was there 50 years ago.
So, but it had to be kind of a real kind of jubilation, a kind of a euphoria that was happening. Finally something was happening to the positive. Kind of give us a little description of how you saw that.
Apart from the actual ceremony which took place in front of the Queen sent her sister, the Princess Margaret, the Vice President of the United States, Mr. Lyndon Johnson, was there. All the ambassadors of countries with whom Jamaica had good relations, all the Caribbean ambassadors were there, heads of government, and everybody in Jamaica who had had a role in government. There were 35,000 people in the stadium, in the stands, as well as the people on the field who were part of the ceremony. After the ceremonial flag ceremony, there was a concert, a festival song. There was a festival commission. There was a festival song. There was a Miss Jamaica. who was subsequently invited to attend the Miss World. And Jamaica was one of the first Caribbean countries to ever have a Miss World. We had our Miss Carol Joan Crawford, who attended the Miss World and brought home the crown.
Mm-hmm.
She was very pretty, but she was also the shortest Miss World ever. She was,
Is that right?
yes, she was only 5'3". You know, these beauty queens are all 5'8", 9, 10,
Right.
6 feet. She was 5'3". So it was quite a mix of events that happened. Additionally, the Festival Commission had organized bands around the country. So each village, country town, all over Kingston, St. Andrew, and every parish, there were street dances. People would meet in the streets and dance from Sunday night all through Monday, because Monday would have been the official day of independence.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
There were dances in the streets. All the various performing artists were taken by floats around. So it was incredible. It was really a beautiful ceremony.
So it was almost kind of your first kind of carnival.
Absolutely.
To some degree.
Absolutely. You know, it's very interesting you should say that, because people were very concerned. They said Jamaicans would go to Trinidad for carnival, or Louisiana, New Orleans for carnival. We didn't have a sort of carnival mantra, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
But it happened.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they felt we were going to be too staid and laid back, but we did have a carnival.
Okay.
It was
That was the beginning, 50 years or
that
so
was the
ago.
beginning. Mm-hmm.
Well, kind of looking at your at your resume, well, you're quite an accomplished woman, having been the director of the Jamaica Fashion Guild, the executive assistant to the United Nations, the distribution and marketing coordinator for Modern Bride, executive assistant and marketing at the Caribbean Tourist Organization, and event coordinator, and least but not last, but you're a licensed real estate.
Yes,
so
I am.
after all this, we can find a place to live.
Absolutely.
And I wanted to kind of take a little quick journey, if you will, through some of these experiences that you've been able to accomplish, to kind of tie into the thread of what it is that we're trying to do, and we are Afwe Culture and Avatar Foundation, our foundation, that have come together to create this merger, if you will, to certainly put this collaboration together in celebration of the Caribbean independence initiatives. And so I want to kind of speak a little bit about, tell us a little bit about then this Fashion Guild, in terms of how fashion played into it, and really the formation of relationships between countries.
Yes, let me say, I'm very excited to be working with the Afwe Culture and their present initiative for next year, because in a small way, almost everything I've ever done was to bring together people of different cultures, people of different talents, to look at possible ways to improve and export one culture into another and develop something out of a small beginning. And that's how the Jamaica Fashion Guild started. Our director of tourism at the time looked at a situation where people would come to Jamaica, and in the hotels there would be little stores, you know, the little inbound stores in the hotel. And they would say, oh, those are pretty clothes. Why can't we get them to buy? And he said, all right. And he put together the major fashion designers of the country, and we sat down at a table with the Jamaica Development Corporation and said, look, you have here a possibility to sell your clothes to people who come here, but also we can export. We can do foreign exchange. You can bring a piece of Jamaica to another country. And of course, the other country, the closest country and the most affluent country, would have been the United States at that time. So I was a third director. There were two other directors before me. And I was very privileged to work with some of the best minds in the fashion industry in Jamaica at the time. We took Jamaican fashions to a different level. We brought it to New York. We had displays in all the major stores. I had the buyers from all the various department stores, Macy's, Bloomingdale's, Lord & Taylor. They were all there. And we did a fashion show on the aircraft, which we call the in-flight fashion show. So in every way we could, we were showing Jamaican fashions, earning Jamaican foreign exchange by selling a Jamaican product into a more affluent culture.
And who are the companies that you or the organizations you worked with in the United States?
No, we had our own office on 7th Avenue.
I see.
We
Okay.
we had a sales office on 7th Avenue, right behind Macy's actually. And we, in addition to that, as I say, we work very closely with the tourist board, and whenever they did a development project to move Jamaica tourism into a market, we would go along. Now that had many legs. We would go with them to Los Angeles. We would go with them to Minneapolis, because they were looking at markets that were not traditional markets. Miami, Washington, New York were the traditional markets where people were always coming from those markets
Right.
to have a vacation in Jamaica. And one of the most interesting trips that we did was to Chicago, because out of that came a very interesting development. We showed in Chicago at Marshall Fields, and we had displays all around the country, around the city, in the plazas and other places of public interest. And at one of these events, a very important lady was present, Mrs. Eunice Johnson, and it blew her away. She was like, "Where did all these beautiful clothes come from?" And she couldn't believe. She said, Jamaica is just a little speck on the map. What are you people doing down there? I have to come down there and see for myself. So she invited us. She said, first of all, bring some of your fashions and we'll show them when we do our next big show in New York. And we did. That was really very exciting. And she came to Jamaica, and we hosted. This was the first time Ebony Fashion Fair had left the continental United States.
I see.
We hosted Ebony Fashion Fair at the newly built Pegasus Hotel in Kingston. It was incredible.
Incredible. Yeah, well, Ebony Fashion Fair has a tremendous history
Absolutely.
in our country through the Johnson publications.
Absolutely.
So that had to be a real kind
Oh,
of
yeah,
feather in the cap.
It was a goosebump moment.
Yeah, and an opportunity for world-class designers, if you will, to be exposed to.
Very exciting.
Right.
I'll tell you, some of the fashions were so expensive, we had to have bring them into the country, because there was one
boy.
dress, for example, that was trimmed with ermine, and it was worth over $5,000. So it had to be.
Wow.
So that had a lot of legs to it. And when people saw it in Ebony and Jet magazine, because of course the pictures of the show are put out in the following issues of the magazine.
Right.
That gave the country more exposure, gave the Jamaican designers a little more room to maneuver.
Okay. So that seemed to be quite successul.
Yes, it was.
In terms of the impact of it all, the fallout of it.
Yes.
So as you evolved from that, I mean, now you've kind of moved forward in doing some other forms of economic development in terms of a role that you played within the UN. I'm understanding then that there was a role you played in terms of being part of the overall team that brought countries together for economic development. Can you touch a little bit on
Yes,
on
certainly.
that?
I worked in the project development department, and I also worked in the executive office, which the executive office of the UN handles administration and human resources. But I did a lot of work in the project development department, and one of the most exciting things to which I was assigned was a project called the Economic Development of Small Island Countries. And that project took about 5 years to come to fruition, and it culminated in a huge conference in Rio de Janeiro. And we had to go to I worked with the interregional advisors who, were sent into these countries to see what were the specific needs and problems of some of the small islands. Because, as you can very well understand, a small island functioning as an independent country has a lot of concerns that big countries don't even realize that these people have it. When you look at a situation where somebody will say to you, well, our poverty line is $35,000 per year per family income, there's some countries where half of that is not even feasible. And they had to look at each situation almost in a standalone and write a program for each one and send in an interregional advisor to work with the governments of the countries to deal with each of these problems. I was privileged to go along with some of the advisors on some of their missions. We went mostly, as I say, to small islands. We went to the islands of the Caribbean. We went to the islands of the Pacific. We went to Madagascar. And we went to several very interesting places. And the conference in Rio was really very important because at the table you had persons who were from the developed world, so to speak, facing off with people who, as I say, their average family incomes were $15,000 and $20,000. And, people are saying, how do these people live with what they have?
Right, okay.
So it was very interesting because some of these people were having problems meeting their foreign currency obligations, and it opened up a mindset where people were willing to look at something beyond the absolute formulas that had existed.
Right. So out of all of this discussion, obviously there were plans for all kinds of major projects, major industries being formulated. Some people, I'm sure some industries it was easier to do because they were more developed than others. Out of that kind of conglomeration of activity and industries, what kind of industries have really held on and blossomed, and what you see a significant progress happening today?
Well, the most meaningful one of the most meaningful situations in which I was involved was projects that had to do with the input of women, because in a lot of these third world, as they were called, countries, the woman was the breadwinner in a lot of cases. People didn't know it because they had a very low profile. They weren't allowed to express themselves as as men were, but they were very important in the development of the home, the children, the health of the family, education. It was very important. And the UN, subsequent to the conference in Rio, set up another department that dealt specifically with the affairs of women in their governments.
I see, okay.
So, they were, it was very interesting to see how they tweaked the technology for some of these women who had never been to school so that they could handle situations. It was very interesting for me the other day to see where the people down at Wall Street were using bicycles to generate power.
Yes, right.
That was one of the things that the women did.
I see.
In countries where there was no taped electricity, wired electricity. They would pedal a bicycle and it would run a generator. There were so many things that were grassroots technology in a world that was technology crazy.
Right. Well, okay.
So but it happened.
It happened.
It
Well,
happened.
it sounds like then there was a real positive interjection of women in the workforce, of women in leadership roles, which is truly significant today. As we kind of going through that process, which seems to be very interesting, there's some other roles that you also played. We're just kind of moving along. There's an awful lot to talk about, but as you begin to do things with the Caribbean Tourism Organization,
Yes.
and we've covered some real ground, but there's some real interesting and very positive things that you've done, and I wanted to kind of get a sense of almost the formation of the CTO and really kind of what its role was at that time, and kind of take it within the time we have left, take it and bring it to what's going on in today's world.
All right. Well, let me say that everything in life stands on the shoulders of something else. And one of the last things that I worked at the UN was the celebration of its 50th anniversary. That led me to a place where people were saying, if you want something organized, send for Dorothy. So I did a short stint with Modern Bride because they were opening up a department which they called Caribbean weddings. They did weddings and honeymoons for people who wanted to get married out of the United States and in the Caribbean islands. And that sort of brought me to the attention of the Caribbean Tourism Organization. So I worked there from 2001 to 2009, and it was a very interesting experience. I worked with a very interesting chief executive officer who was also the marketing officer, very brilliant man, and he had ideas about how tourism should develop and become really important as the main income earner of foreign exchange without crossing the lines where it became a problem to the ecology or the environment of the countries, or it became a situation where the people who ran the tourist boards sort of kept the local persons out of the loop.
I see.
That was something very important to him. And I was, as I say, I was very privileged to work with him on some of the ideas. I told him about some of the ideas that I'd put in motion while I was at Bride magazine, where we brought a truckload of sand into Bloomingdale's and created a beach. And we brought food, because there are two things that attract people to a location: the sound of music and the smell of food.
That's right.
And if you start cooking Caribbean food, in 15 minutes, everybody in this building is going to come and say, what are you people doing up there? So we did, we brought chefs in from the Caribbean, and they performed. They did a chef program where they did their specialties. We brought musicians in, and they played music, and we created an event which piggybacked on the usual conference of heads of Caribbean government and became Caribbean Week in New York.
All right. Well, that's fabulous, because as I see this kind of thing carrying over, it kind of ties itself directly in what we're talking about when we're talking about Carib Gold and the celebration of these significant countries, as well as the whole Caribbean Basin. 50th year celebration of Jamaica, as well as Trinidad and its independence. So we're looking at putting together kind of a year-long program that represents our view of Caribbean arts and culture. Okay, and begin to do it with a program that we're launching in March at the Brooklyn Academy of Music. We want to be able to follow it up then with an exposition of fine art as we see it through the depiction of Carnival. Those persons who were extremely significant in the design and the look of Carnival. So that way we're within our missions as both RP Culture and the Avatar Foundation. And then kind of followed that up with a gala that we're having here in White Plains that's part of our 10th anniversary, if you will. And then kind of go forward with a program that we're looking to put together in one of the local establishments in Westchester County that can bring a lot of these people together so that it is our own kind of celebration, almost like a carnival, if you will,
Yeah.
but an event itself. And then really kind of go into the latter part of the year where agriculture is celebrating its 20th anniversary. So, and we're going to end up then with Kwanzaa, a Kwanzaa celebration, which is community, family, and culture. So we're looking at all of what you've done, the things that you have done, and we're kind of glad to have you as part of this team to be able to utilize your expertise and knowledge as we begin to pull these things together and provide the authenticity of it, the legitimacy of it, the dignity of it as we kind of go forward in this celebration. But I want to take a minute in this few seconds that we do have to, if you have questions, I believe, we can look at, we can go to the websites of the CaribbeanTravel.com and the CTO.org for further information on tourism and CTO and on consumer travel. And for more information, you can look at Africulture at 718-655-5369. Visit our website at avatarfoundation.org. I want to thank you very much for joining us, and we appreciate your time and your expertise.
I wish to thank you, and I wish to thank Ms. Antoinette Pitkin for inviting me to come on board to work with the organization. I really think it's a privilege, and I'm very happy to put the little knowledge I have at your disposal.
Okay, that's right.
And thank you.